Flight attendant slaps disabled veteran. 5 minutes later, he gets his revenge. The airport buzzed with its usual energy. Families rushing to gates, businessmen glued to phones, and travelers lost in thought. Among them was an elderly black man named Walter Davis, seated quietly in his wheelchair at gate 14. Dressed in a neatly pressed blazer, a military cap resting on his lap, Walter's eyes held a quiet strength that spoke of battles won, both on and off the field. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below. His destination, Washington, D.C., where he was to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for his service as a decorated veteran. Walter had seen more in his 76 years than most people could imagine, but nothing had prepared him for the encounter that awaited him on Flight 127. Boarding began. Passengers shuffled forward, greeted by the flight attendants at the entrance. Walter wheeled himself up, handing his ticket to a tall woman with a name tag that read Cheryl. Her eyes flickered with disdain the moment she saw him. "Need some help?" she asked, her voice dripping with forced politeness. Walter smiled. "No, thank you, I can manage." As he made his way to his seat, Cheryl's glare followed him. Something about his presence, his quiet dignity, seemed to irritate her. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the service began. Cheryl approached Walter's row, her eyes narrowing. She leaned in, her voice a low hiss. "You people always want special treatment, sitting in a wheelchair for sympathy. Pathetic." Walter, shocked but composed, looked up. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she snapped. "Taking up space." Before Walter could respond, Cheryl's hand flashed out, striking him across the face. Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers froze, eyes wide with disbelief. A young woman in the next row pulled out her phone, recording the incident. Walter's cheek stung, but his eyes remained calm. He had faced worse, much worse. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice steady. Cheryl smirked. "What are you going to do about it?" Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the cabin. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Captain Samuel Davis. Today's flight holds special significance for me as we have a very important passenger on board." Cheryl's face paled. Walter's eyes twinkled. The passengers looked around, murmuring in confusion. Captain Davis continued, "My father, Walter Davis, is with us today. He's a decorated war hero, and without his sacrifices, many of us wouldn't be here. It's an honor to fly him to Washington, where he'll be recognized for his service." The cabin erupted in applause. Cheryl's eyes darted around, panic setting in. Walter leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the truth coming to light." The young woman recording stood up, voice firm. "We all saw what you did. This video is going viral the moment we land." Cheryl stumbled backward, her confidence shattered. Flight attendants rushed to her, whispers of "you're done" filling the air. 5 minutes after the slap, the tables had turned. Walter didn't need to lift a finger. Justice had its own way of finding those who thought they were untouchable. When the plane landed, airline officials were waiting. Cheryl was escorted off, eyes downcast, her career over in an instant. Passengers cheered as Walter was wheeled off the plane, his son waiting with open arms. As they embraced, Walter whispered, "Sometimes, son, you don't have to fight back. The world has a way of taking care of people like that." Samuel nodded. "You taught me that, Dad." And with that, Walter Davis, the quiet hero, rolled into the next chapter of his life, leaving behind a lesson that would be remembered long after the echoes of applause faded. As Walter and his son Samuel walked through the jet bridge, the hum of the airport terminal seemed distant. The echoes of what had just transpired lingered like a heavy mist. Walter's face remained calm, his eyes betraying no trace of anger or bitterness. He had seen too much in life to be shaken by a single moment of ignorance. Yet, Samuel's eyes burned with quiet fury. "You okay, Dad?" Samuel asked, his voice low but steady. Walter nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in a soft, weary smile. "I've faced worse. Don't let it cloud your mind, son. People like her, They're their own undoing. Samuel tightened his grip on the handles of the wheelchair, guiding his father through the bustling terminal. As they approached the exit, a man in a sharply pressed suit approached, flanked by 2 airline staff members. His name tag read Marcus Linton, the airline's regional manager. "Mr. Davis?" Marcus greeted, his voice polished but thick with an underlying tension. "I want to personally apologize for what happened on board. That flight attendant's behavior was inexcusable. We've taken immediate action." Walter raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "It's not about apologies or actions. It's about understanding." His eyes locked onto Marcus's. "What will you do to make sure no one else faces what I faced today?" Marcus hesitated, unprepared for the question. "We have protocols in place, but I assure you, we'll review them thoroughly." "Protocols aren't enough," Walter replied. His voice was firm, but carried a weight of expectation, one that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. "Real change requires more than words. It demands effort." Marcus swallowed, nodding. "I understand, sir. We'll make sure to follow through." Walter didn't press further. He had learned long ago that the true measure of change wasn't in promises, but in the quiet, unseen actions that followed. He turned to Samuel. "Let's go, son. We have more important places to be." Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Samuel helped his father into the passenger seat of the car, a deep silence settling between them as they pulled away from the airport. The weight of the day hung heavy, each moment replaying in Samuel's mind. "Why didn't you let me say more back there?" Samuel finally broke the silence. "She deserved worse." Walter gazed out the window, watching the fading light. "Because anger only fuels their fire. You meet hate with hate and you give it power. The best revenge is living in a way that shows them they can't touch you." Samuel exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. "I know you're right, Dad. It's just hard." Walter's eyes softened. "I didn't fight in wars to come back and fight battles like this. But sometimes the fight chooses you. What matters is how you face it." They drove in silence for a while, the road stretching endlessly ahead. When they reached the hotel, Samuel helped his father inside, the quiet lobby echoing with their footsteps. As they settled in, a soft knock came at the door. Samuel opened it to find a young woman standing there, one of the passengers from the flight, the one who had recorded everything. She held a small envelope in her hand. I wanted to give you this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if it means much, but thank you for your service and for showing strength today." Walter took the envelope, his eyes warm. "Thank you, young lady." She nodded and turned to leave but paused. "You didn't deserve what happened. No one does." As she disappeared down the hallway, Samuel closed the door, watching as his father opened the envelope. Inside was a simple card, handwritten with a few words. "Your dignity taught us all something today." Walter held the card for a moment, then placed it on the nightstand. "Small ripples, son," he said, his voice low. "That's how you change the world." Samuel watched his father, a man who had faced more battles than he could count, and realized that true strength wasn't in retaliation. It was in resilience. Walter didn't need revenge. His life, his legacy, was the greatest answer to all the hatred the world could throw at him. The room fell into a peaceful silence, the weight of the day slowly lifting. Walter closed his eyes, the quiet strength of his presence filling the space, and somewhere beyond the walls of that hotel, the small ripples of his quiet defiance began to spread. If you enjoyed this story, it doesn't cost you anything, and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.